Hi there, this is Eric. It's June 9th and 2025, and I've got another video for you. This is an article that I wrote on my website, and I've also posted it, the text version of it on Substack. But I'll just read it out because sometimes people prefer to listen rather than to read. So I'm calling this "The Little Matter of Agency." Ukraine is not the problem. At the beginning, I show a screenshot of a post that was made in November 2013 on a website called the Saker. And I was following the Saker back then in November 2013. I was aware that something was going down in Ukraine that didn't look good. And so I was following this guy. And so you can see the screenshot where it says a bird's eye view of the vineyard. And the byline of it, it says the Saker, and it says, "Stop the Empire's War on Russia." It's interesting that he said that back in 2013, and yet in 2022, when Russia finally intervened in a complete mess, where people had been bombed and attacked for 8 years, and the West did nothing about it. In fact, they even propped up the regime that was doing it. Russia was accused of invading Ukraine unprovoked, and here's this guy talking in 2013 saying, "Stop the war! Stop the empire's war on Russia." And of course, subsequently, as the United States has come to the realization that it is losing that war that it fomented, that people like Mark Rubio and Keith Kellogg have now openly admitted that this is, in fact, a war on Russia using Ukraine as a proxy. The person who wrote this, by the way, shut down his blog because he's ethnic Russian. He was born out. He was the child of a dissident who left after the Russian Revolution. Um, there was a whole, probably several million Russians left because they opposed the Bolshevik Revolution. He was one of those people, and he was also an anti-Soviet person. But as he became more politically aware, he finally realized that this wasn't a war against the Soviet Union. The Cold War was not about the Soviet Union; it's a war against Russia, and that is where he finally had to come to the realization that this is what this is all about. I say here, it's kind of humorous how everyone familiar with the Ukraine conflict is asking who is responsible for an attack on Russia's nuclear-capable aircraft, an act that could easily precipitate a nuclear war. So I want to talk about agency. Simply put, agency is the idea of the capacity to act. When I was first starting off as an insurance agent, we had to learn about agency. I was acting as an agent of a principal who had empowered me to act in place of the principal. Now we hear Zelensky bragging about his role in little scrappy Ukraine and its super duper intelligence service outsmarting the evil Ruskies and destroying 40 bombers. Of course, per usual, his story proved to be exaggerated. It wasn't 40 aircraft, and if you were honest, you would have to admit that he did not act independently. That is absolutely true historical fact. Time goes from present to past. As you know, much of my thinking is informed by my practice and study of Zen. And there was a famous Zen master named Dogen Zenji who said, "Time goes from present to past." This is absurd, but in our practice, sometimes it's true. Instead of time progressing from past to present, it goes backwards from present to past. This is actually true because we are actually controlled by our past, and because we failed to recognize it, as Gore Vidal called the United States of amnesia. We have no past, so we don't know why things happen the way they happen. And then when the media tells us what to believe or what to think, We do so because they have no context. So I try to provide the context. I'm constantly told by ignorant, biased, self-righteous Westerners how the current conflict in Ukraine started. I've researched this back 100 years, but a reasonable starting point is the article from a blog now no longer active, but whose content is still available on the Internet Archive. I've been following the Ukraine crisis from its near inception since 2013 when this article was written. I used to follow the blog at that time, and as the heat turned up on all things Russian, the blogger Andrei Raevsky shut down the blog under pressure since he's not a U.S. citizen, and he was worried about his sentiment, which he clearly stated was stop the empire's war on Russia. So I've copied and pasted the entire article in the body of my article, so you can read it and you can see what his thinking was, and you can see how the current crisis occurred according to somebody who was witnessing it at the time. So he says, just as I predicted in my last piece about the developments in the Ukraine, European politicians and European opposition parties have gone into overdrive to attempt yet another color-coded revolution in Kiev. When people talk about what happened in 2014, this is not a revolution of dignity. This is not an enhancement of a democratic process. There was a color revolution, just like many other color revolutions, where the U.S. goes into a country, messes it up politically, and overthrows the government. This is exactly what happened. The normally demure and low-key Euro bureaucrats have suddenly found it in themselves to castigate Russia with irate statements about unacceptable Russian interference, which is really rich because, the whole thing about Russiagate, that was, Russian interference, and that was proven to be a complete lie. Recently, the Georgian government, it was not, no, the Romanian government just accused Russia of interfering in an election where the EU didn't like the guy who actually was going to win, so they said he was a Russian agent, voided the election, and they blamed it all on Russia. Just keeps going on and on. As for the opposition, it used its formidable resources to bring people from all over Ukraine, the Baltic states, and Poland to Kiev to organize a mass rally, and just to make sure that everyone would show up, they began the rally with a free rock concert. Finally, the united opposition parties have declared that they have created a united headquarters of the resistance, which will have as its first task to coordinate a Ukrainian-wide general strike. Finally, the opposition, led by Yulia Tymoshenko from her jail, because she's just another corrupt politician on the take, is now openly calling for the overthrow of the Yanukovych government and new elections, which is exactly what happened. As a side note, this woman, Yulia Tymoshenko, as I noted in a video that I have posted in one of my other articles, was calling for dropping an atomic bomb on Russians. So this is the kind of people that Russia is dealing with in Ukraine. I'll let you read through the rest of the article so you can get a feeling for what this guy was talking about. But I think you get the idea that he was basically foreseeing what was happening and how this crisis, this terrible situation that we're in now in Ukraine, was entirely predictable. And this guy, he just he states it all in his article back in November 2013. Now I will continue with my comment. The Sakers prediction has largely come true. The color revolution, aka Maidan, happened not just due to the Europeans, but also because of the Americans. Americans like John McCain and, lo and behold, Lindsey Graham, whom we still see all over the news. Barack Obama was the president. Joe Biden, who was vice president, but he was the one who gave the final okay for this coup to go forward. Victoria Nuland, the U.S. Ambassador Jeffrey Piot, It's all blatant interference in Ukraine's affairs, and yet we claim to be, spreading freedom and democracy. But of course, it's worse because we now know that not only did Obama and Joe Biden okay the coup just 3 months later in February 14th, following this article, but when Trump came to power in 2016, despite or perhaps because of Democratic Party sabotage of Bernie Sanders, who probably would have won the 2016 nomination, except for the sheer incompetence and obnoxiousness of Hillary Clinton and her ilk, Trump as president significantly increased the Ukraine military, preparing it for a major war with Russia. Yet what has followed is Trump's disingenuous claim that he had nothing to do with the war in Ukraine, while he armed Ukraine multiples more than where it was when he took office. He slapped numerous sanctions on Russia. He actually trashed two very important treaties, the INF Treaty and the Open Skies Treaty, while claiming that Putin and he got along just fine. Claims regarding Trump's psychological contradictions are well founded. The bottom line, it's all on the USA. We can talk about Boris Johnson sabotaging peace talks in March and April of 2022, 10 years after the coup. We can talk about the EU, NATO supplying arms to Ukraine with a purpose to weaken Russia. It's funny that the UK constantly refers to Russia as the threat, when in fact the UK has attacked Russia 3 times at least. In the Crimean War of 1853, in the post-Bolshevik Revolution of 1917 and 1918, when Winston Churchill himself proposed to strangle the revolution in its crib. It's nothing like Britain's, as a force for democracy, strangling other people's revolutions. But that's the British for you. And in current use of Storm Shadow missiles, Ukraine is at least nominally not part of NATO. It's nominally not part of NATO. So what's the requirement to intervene in a territorial dispute not on Great Britain's borders? However, the vast majority of funding and training of Ukraine's military and intelligence services came from the United States. Ukraine is the USA equivalent of Rosemary's Baby, a satanic offspring. I'm referring to a movie about a woman who yearns for success, and she ends up becoming impregnated by the devil. And the baby, is supposed to be successful, but there's consequences. Trump's absurd attempts to mediate between the two, Ukraine and Russia, while arming Ukraine and sanctioning Russia, should be obvious to any objective analysis as blatant gaslighting. How to rebalance the chaos. Trump wants to bring the killing, that is, the destruction of the army he created, to an end. Not a word about ending sanctions, restoring Russian diplomatic properties, restoring the $300 billion in sequestered, stolen Russian overseas accounts, holding accountable those who murdered all those innocent people like Daria Dugina, the dozens of murdered Russian and Ukrainian correspondents who've tried to cover this war objectively. Not to mention the million or more Ukrainians who died because of the West's refusal to negotiate with or even honor the myriad agreements with Russia since the end of the Cold War. While Russia accuses Ukraine of being a terrorist state, where does agency come in? Ukraine, whether the US, EU, NATO, Ukraine likes it or not, is acting as their agent because they empower it. This certainly implies that the principals who empower it are also terrorist states. Putin to Trump. Let's make a deal. How are Russia's grievances to be addressed? The hundreds killed in terrorist attacks, the assets stolen, and most recently, the attacks on Russian nuclear-capable bombers. Can Putin say to Trump, "Sure, let's make a deal. Your agent blew up our bombers, so we will blow up 40 of your bombers that Zelensky claims to have destroyed, even Stephen. You will reopen our consulates and pay back rent for commandeering our property. You will return the 300 billion we held in reserve in Western banks with interest. But accountability is simply not in the mentality of the countries of the collective West. What are the chances that any of these will be resolved in this manner, or that the Europeans will give up their rabid obsession with Russia? The fundamental problem: the Western leaders are addicted to domination and addicted to war. Back during the Vietnam War, as the realization was dawning on the American people that what we were doing was wrong, a cartoon appeared with the caption, "We have met the enemy and he is us." So sad to say, if you were among those who criticized Russia for its stated intention to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine, you were played, again, by the media and the whole power structure that wanted this war in Ukraine. What's worse, like the Germans post-World War II who said, "Gee, we didn't know." Ignorance is no excuse. The truth is out there. You just have to be willing to face it. So that's what I have to say here. And if you appreciate what I have to say, you can like and share it and subscribe, even make a donation if you would. That would be very helpful to me. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.